Well, Yemen's Houthis claiming credit now for the recent attack on a U.S. cargo ship, the Star Iris. That ship was bound for Iran. It is just the latest attack disrupting trade in the Red Sea. Major corporations like Maersk warning there have been no signs of improvements and will continue to reroute their shipments from the Suez Canal. Let's bring in Matt Muenster. He's Breakthrough Chief Economist. Matt, good to talk to you today. Give me a sense of the lay of the land right now in the Red Sea. I mean, there have been some reports that suggest that the attacks have started to scale back since the U.S. and the U.K. went on the offensive in response to some of those attacks we saw several months ago. How do things look?
Thank you. I think you summed it up really well. There's not a sense of great improvement in the Red Sea right now. It will take an extended period of time of improvement for there to be confidence among major corporations shipping, moving their freight that would normally pursue with their freight through the Red Sea and out through the Suez Canal, or vice versa, to reroute and change their services to bring them back if they are rerouting freight from the Cape of Good Hope to return to that preferred method of transit. It's going to take some time.
When you consider the importance of the Suez Canal in global trade and the disruptions we're seeing right now, where are the biggest pain points being felt?
Largest pain points right now seem to be hitting those major corporations of container shipping, real prominent brands in the tanker shipping industry that have chosen to move most, if not all, of their freight around the canal, that are rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope and ultimately choosing to take this destination to keep their crews safe, to keep their cargo safe. Ultimately, that's a profound impact. Also has an impact on the cargo owners whose freight are now moving around the Cape of Good Hope. This is a massive transportation disruption. It does matter substantially to transit times. It's adding 10 to 12 days in some instances. It is coming at an increased cost. There are surcharges that are being put into place to accommodate for this conflict disruption. It's an added cost that cargo owners weren't accounting for at the beginning of this year. And ultimately, it impacts both those carrying the freight as well those whose freight is being carried now around the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah, when you talk about those increased costs, I mean, what industries are seeing the biggest jump in that? And how much of that ultimately down the line gets passed down to the consumer?
This has been a question that's been given a lot of consideration. I will say there is disruption to transportation. It does come with increased costs. One of the increased costs, even through emissions, the European Union's emissions trading system kicked off for maritime shipping earlier this year. That has an added cost as we've increased our transit time. There are more emissions that come from the Cape of Good Hope. Ultimately, though, what we've seen played out is a doubling of what we call spot or near-term rates from December to January for a lot of freight. What's also true is that a lot of cargo is not carried on near-term rates. It's in longer-term contracted rates. So when we think about what industry and who's impacted, it's particularly shippers or cargo owners who are very much relying on near-term rates to move freight. Can be smaller cargo owners. Many of your larger multinational corporations are going to be in these longer term contracts and just won't have their products subjected to this kind of cost inflation from a disruption, even of this magnitude. It also happens because we're talking about massive economies of scale, whether we're moving refined products in tankers or containerized freight consumer products on container ships. The economies of scale take a lot of this cost increase and make it negligible, particularly in the face of what we experienced during the pandemic. It just doesn't match up. And so while there is an impact to both the carriers who need to ultimately meet the higher costs and pass along the higher costs of changing their transit and changing their services that they're providing to cargo owners, and there's a higher cost to the cargo owners as a consequence of that. It's just not being something that's substantial enough to make an impact downstream to consumers at this juncture. Just not out of a similar scale to the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, that's important context because there's certainly a lot of people who've been watching this saying, is this kind of a repeat of what we saw during the pandemic? What's been the knock-on impact to air and rail freight? Because we have seen plenty of reports out there about companies who are trying to sort of, put the puzzle pieces together right now and saying maybe shipping is not the best option given the uncertainty in the Suez Canal.
It is a near-term logistical shuffle that's unfolding, that for the time being, we see increased rates in maritime transportation. There's more capacity that will be deployed to help offset some of those rate increases and ultimately the pressure it's placed on service times. As you mentioned, there is an increase that's being experienced for air freight. Rates are increasing. They're receiving some pressure. There are more volumes going to the air as transit times and services downstream need to be met. Products need to arrive where they need to be when they need to be there. Ultimately, when you talk about inland distribution, this is one of the reasons why this inflation impact of the Red Sea disruption won't touch the experience of what we had during the pandemic. Is ultimately, it's very much an international movement of international shipping cargoes, air freight. We've seen rate increases. There's some overland rail increases. But as the freight gets to the domestic United States, there are some benefits perhaps coming on the West Coast, but our intermodal freight demand had been so low in 2023 that this is just a subtle boost for the industry in terms of its total freight volumes. So it has the capacity available to accommodate any increases to the West Coast, and we're not seeing much of a budge in terms of the rate for intermodal services. We're not seeing that price per mile increase.